In the summer of 2022, something unusual happened in the Nevada desert. For decades, millions of people had looked across the vast blue waters of Lake Mead and seen the same thing. One of America's largest reservoirs, a critical source of drinking water, and a symbol of engineering triumphs in the American Southwest. But that year, the lake began revealing a different story. The water kept falling. Month after month, shorelines retreated farther from their historic positions. Boat docks that once floated on deep water now rested on dry ground. Launch ramps built for busy marinas ended abruptly in empty desert. Along the canyon walls, a massive white mineral stain, often called the bathtub ring, grew larger and more visible, marking where the water used to be. The drought affecting the American Southwest had become impossible to ignore. Scientists warned that the Colorado River Basin was experiencing one of the most severe dry periods in recorded history. Reservoirs across the region were shrinking, water managers worried about future shortages. Yet while experts focused on the future, the falling water was exposing pieces of the past, and what emerged from beneath Lake Mead would capture the attention of historians, divers, engineers, and mystery enthusiasts alike. At first, the discoveries seemed predictable. Old roads appeared where boats once sailed. Foundations of long-abandoned structures emerged from the mud. The remains of settlements that had vanished beneath the reservoir nearly a century earlier slowly returned to daylight. Then came something no one expected. Deep beneath the surface, hidden in a secluded cove on the Nevada side of the lake, a diver surveying the lakebed spotted an object that looked completely out of place. It wasn't a vehicle, it wasn't part of a building, and it wasn't natural. Embedded directly into solid rock was a circular steel hatch. The structure appeared deliberate, engineered, purpose-built. Most surprisingly of all, it appeared sealed. For decades, Lake Mead has attracted recreational divers searching for underwater landmarks and forgotten relics. Many discoveries have been made by accident. A diver notices an unusual shape, investigates further, and uncovers something history forgot. This discovery followed a similar pattern. The diver wasn't searching for hidden infrastructure. No government records had pointed investigators toward this exact location. Instead, the hatch appeared unexpectedly on camera footage captured during a routine exploration dive. The moment experts examined the images, questions immediately followed. Who built it? Why was it there? And perhaps most importantly, what was hidden behind it? The hatch itself measured only a few feet across, but its implications were enormous. Unlike random debris scattered across the lake floor, this object showed clear signs of intentional design. It sat within a metal frame secured into the surrounding rock. Bolts lined its circumference in a pattern suggesting that it had been engineered to be opened and resealed when necessary. This wasn't a discarded object. It was an access point, a doorway, a controlled entrance to something beneath the surface. Yet, according to records that would later emerge, nobody had officially accessed the structure since before Lake Mead even existed. To understand how extraordinary that claim is, we need to step back nearly a century. Long before tourists visited Hoover Dam, long before speedboats crossed Lake Mead, long before millions of Americans depended on the Colorado River for water, this landscape looked entirely different. There was no giant lake, no endless reservoirs stretching across the desert. Instead, the Colorado River carved its way through rugged canyons, winding between cliffs and isolated communities that had adapted to life in one of the harshest environments in North America. Then, everything changed. In the early 1930s, the United States government embarked on one of the most ambitious engineering projects in its history. The goal was enormous: control the Colorado River, generate hydroelectric power, provide reliable water to a rapidly growing Southwest. The solution became Hoover Dam. Construction began during the depths of the Great Depression. Thousands of workers arrived in the Nevada desert to help build a structure unlike anything the region had ever seen. The conditions were brutal. Temperatures frequently exceeded 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Workers blasted through solid rock. Massive quantities of concrete were poured all the clock. Entire support communities sprang up almost overnight to accommodate the workforce. By 1935, the project was complete. Standing hundreds of feet above the canyon floor, Hoover Dam transformed the Colorado River forever. Once the gates closed, water began accumulating behind the enormous concrete barrier. Year after year, the reservoir expanded. Valleys disappeared, roads vanished, buildings were swallowed, entire communities were erased beneath the rising water. The reservoir that formed became known as Lake Mead. At full capacity, it would become the largest reservoir in the United States by volume, holding trillions of gallons of water and supporting millions of people across the American Southwest. But while most people focused on what the project created, far fewer considered what it destroyed. Everything beneath Lake Mead had a history. The desert floor wasn't empty. It contained roads, ranches, mining sites, settlements, survey stations, and construction infrastructure. Some structures were removed before the flooding began. Others were abandoned. Many simply disappeared beneath the advancing water. As decades passed, memories faded. Maps were archived. Construction documents were boxed away. Workers retired. Entire generations grew up assuming the lake had always been there. The hidden world beneath the reservoir slowly slipped from public memory. Yet not everything vanished completely. Certain structures had been intentionally designed to survive. During Hoover Dam's construction, engineers created an extensive network of inspection points, monitoring systems, drainage passages, and geological access routes throughout the surrounding canyon. Some remained accessible after the reservoir filled. Others were sealed permanently. Or at least, that was the intention. The problem is that nearly 90 years can erase a surprising amount of institutional knowledge. Records become fragmented, personnel change, documentation is misplaced. Eventually, details that once seemed routine become mysteries. Which brings us back to the hatch. When footage of the underwater structure began circulating among researchers familiar with Hoover Dam's construction history, something immediately stood out. The design appeared familiar. Very familiar. Certain characteristics matched engineering standards used by federal construction crews during the early 1930s. The shape, the mounting system, the bolt arrangement, even the dimensions, everything suggested the hatch wasn't a random addition made years later. It appeared to date back to the original construction era itself. If that interpretation was correct, then someone had installed the hatch before Lake Mead filled with water. Someone had sealed it. Someone had documented it. And then someone had walked away, fully aware that rising water would soon hide the entrance for generations. For nearly 90 years, the reservoir protected that secret. Storms came and went. World wars reshaped history. Millions of visitors toured Hoover Dam. Yet beneath the surface, the hatch remained untouched, waiting. Then nature intervened, not through an earthquake, not through an engineering failure, but through drought. As water levels continued dropping throughout the 21st century, the lake began exposing parts of its forgotten past. The process was slow enough that few people noticed at first, but eventually the retreat became impossible to ignore. The deeper the water fell, the more history emerged. And among all those discoveries, one stood apart from the rest. A sealed steel doorway hidden in stone, a relic from the earliest days of Hoover Dam, a structure that may not have been opened since the year before the reservoir existed. The question wasn't whether the hatch was real. Divers had already confirmed that. The real question was far more intriguing. What exactly had engineers considered important enough to seal away before an entire valley disappeared beneath the waters of Lake Mead? And if the hatch still exists today, untouched after nearly a century underwater, what might still be waiting on the other side?
Before Lake Mead became one of the most important reservoirs in North America, it was something entirely different. It was a living landscape. The valleys, now hidden beneath billions of gallons of water, were once crossed by dirt roads, ranch fences, and wagon trails. Families raised children there. Businesses operated there. Travelers moved through the region long before Hoover Dam transformed the Colorado River into a giant reservoir. Today, when visitors stand on the shore of Lake Mead, it is difficult to imagine that entire communities once occupied the ground beneath the water. Yet that forgotten world is essential to understanding the mystery of the hatch. Because the hatch was not placed in an empty wilderness. It was installed in a landscape that was already changing rapidly as federal engineers prepared one of the largest construction projects in American history. Among all the communities swallowed by the reservoir, none has become more famous than the town of St. Thomas. Its story begins in the mid-19th century. In 1865, Mormon settlers established the small community in what they believed was part of Utah territory. Years later, a boundary survey revealed an embarrassing mistake. The settlement was actually located inside Nevada. The correction created an unusual problem. Residents suddenly discovered they owed years of taxes to a state they never realized they lived in. Most communities might have collapsed under such circumstances. St. Thomas survived. The people who lived there adapted to the mistake and continued building their town. Over the decades, homes appeared along dusty streets, a school served local children, businesses opened, families established roots that stretched across multiple generations. Life was not easy. The surrounding desert was unforgiving. Water was limited, temperatures were extreme, yet the community endured. By the early 1930s, St. Thomas had become a permanent fixture of the region. Then, federal officials arrived with devastating news. The construction of Hoover Dam would create a reservoir so massive that the entire valley would disappear beneath water. And if the hatch still exists today, untouched after nearly a century underwater, what might still be waiting on the other side? Everything would have to be abandoned. Homes, businesses, fields, roads, the town itself. For residents, the announcement was almost impossible to comprehend. They were being asked to leave a community their families had spent decades building. Some relocated quickly, others delayed as long as possible. According to historical accounts, one of the final residents to leave was a man named Hugh Lord. As the waters of the newly forming reservoir slowly advanced across the valley floor, he reportedly remained behind longer than anyone else. The story has become part of local legend. Sitting on his porch, he watched the water continue rising toward his property. Only when it finally reached his home did he agree to leave. Soon afterward, St. Thomas disappeared beneath Lake Mead. For generations, it remained hidden. Then, the drought arrived. As water levels dropped during the 21st century, portions of the town began reappearing. Visitors suddenly found themselves walking through streets that had spent decades underwater. Stone foundations emerged from the desert floor. Fragments of walls stood exposed to sunlight once again. The ghost town became one of the most visible reminders that Lake Mead covered far more than water. It covered history. Yet St. Thomas represented only a fraction of what vanished. Across the valley, ranches and farms were abandoned. Mining operations that had once contributed to Nevada's economy disappeared beneath the rising reservoir. Roads connecting isolated desert communities simply ended. Some were dismantled before the flooding. Others were left behind exactly where they stood. As the water advanced, bridges vanished. Trails disappeared. Entire transportation routes were erased from the landscape. To modern observers, these losses might seem inevitable. Large infrastructure projects often require sacrifice. But what makes Lake Mead unique is the scale of what was buried. This was not a single town, it was an entire environment. And hidden within that environment was another category of structures that received far less public attention: the infrastructure created by the dam builders themselves. When people think about Hoover Dam, they usually picture the massive concrete wall spanning Black Canyon. What they rarely consider is everything required to construct it. Building Hoover Dam involved far more than pouring concrete. Engineers had to study the geology of the canyon. They drilled into surrounding rock formations. They installed monitoring systems. They created inspection routes. They carved tunnels through mountainsides. They established access points throughout the construction zone. Many of these systems were never intended to be seen by the public. They served practical purposes: monitoring stability, managing drainage, evaluating pressure, tracking geological movement, protecting the integrity of the project. Some remained accessible after construction ended, others were obsolete, and some were sealed before the reservoir filled. At the time, sealing them made perfect sense. The lake was coming. Anything below the future waterline would soon be submerged. If engineers wanted to protect certain areas from contamination, pressure damage, or unauthorized access, sealing them was the logical solution. No one expected future generations to care. To the workers involved, these were engineering decisions, routine tasks performed during a massive construction project. Complete the inspection, close the access point, record the location, move on. Yet, time has a strange way of transforming ordinary decisions into historical mysteries. The workers who installed those systems never imagined that one day people would search for traces of their work. They certainly never expected a severe drought to expose forgotten evidence nearly a century later. But that is exactly what happened. As Lake Mead continued shrinking, archaeologists, historians, photographers, and divers gained access to areas that had remained hidden for decades. Each new discovery offered another glimpse into the past. Some discoveries were expected, others were surprising, a few were disturbing. Human remains were recovered from previously submerged locations. Several cases attracted national attention, particularly when evidence suggested criminal activity from decades earlier. Old vehicles appeared, historic structures resurfaced, artifacts emerged from mud that had remained undisturbed for generations. Every month seemed to reveal something new. The reservoir was effectively reversing history. The flooding that began in the 1930s was being undone 1 foot of water at a time. As a result, researchers gained an unprecedented opportunity to examine what had been lost. Yet, while tourists focused on ghost towns and abandoned buildings, a smaller group of investigators became interested in something else: the hidden infrastructure. Unlike houses or roads, these systems had been intentionally designed. They were part of a larger engineering network.
Many existed for reasons not immediately obvious to the public. Some connected to drainage systems, others supported inspection operations. Still others were tied to geological monitoring efforts that helped engineers understand how the canyon responded to the immense weight of Hoover Dam and its reservoir. The challenge was that records from the 1930s were not always complete.
Many documents survived. Others disappeared. Some remained buried in archives, rarely examined by anyone outside specialized engineering fields. As researchers dug deeper into historical records, they began realizing that portions of the original construction network were not fully understood. Locations had been documented, but details were often limited. Personnel retired. Knowledge faded. Decades passed. What had once been common knowledge among engineers gradually became historical fragments. That realization would become critically important after the discovery of the hatch, because the hatch suggested that at least one piece of pre-reservoir infrastructure had survived almost exactly as it had been left, untouched, unopened, waiting beneath the water. And if one sealed access point remained hidden on the lake floor, a troubling possibility emerged. Could there be others? Could additional entrances, inspection routes, or forgotten passages still exist beneath Lake Mead? And if so, how much of the original construction network remains concealed beneath the reservoir today? Those questions transformed the hatch from a simple underwater curiosity into something far more significant. It was no longer just a mysterious object. It had become a doorway into a forgotten chapter of Hoover Dam's construction history, a chapter buried beneath the reservoir for nearly 90 years. And in Part 3, investigators begin tracing the origins of the hatch itself, following historical records, engineering designs, and forgotten maintenance logs that may reveal why the entrance was built, who sealed it, and what might still exist beyond the steel door hidden beneath Lake Mead. By the time footage of the mysterious hatch began circulating online, one question dominated every discussion. What exactly had the diver found? The object itself was simple enough: a circular steel hatch embedded directly into the rock floor of a secluded cove along Lake Mead's Nevada shoreline. Yet the more experts examined the footage, the more unusual the structure appeared. This wasn't random debris. It wasn't part of a sunken boat or a forgotten vehicle. The hatch looked intentional, engineered, designed for a specific purpose. At approximately 3 feet in diameter, it sat flush against the surrounding rock and was secured by a series of evenly spaced bolts around its circumference. Unlike most metal objects left underwater for decades, it showed remarkably little visible deterioration. That detail immediately attracted attention. Lake Mead is not the ocean, but nearly 90 years underwater should still leave significant signs of corrosion, mineral buildup, and long-term wear. Yet the hatch appeared unusually well preserved. To some observers, that suggested it might have been accessed more recently than expected. Others argued that environmental conditions within that section of the reservoir may have protected the structure better than anticipated. Whatever the explanation, one fact remained clear: someone had installed this hatch for a reason. The challenge was figuring out what that reason was. As researchers began examining historical construction records from Hoover Dam, a fascinating possibility emerged. The hatch closely resembled a category of infrastructure known as pre-impoundment access points. The term sounds technical, but the concept is surprisingly simple. Before Lake Mead existed, engineers spent years transforming Black Canyon into one of the most ambitious construction projects in American history. During that process, they drilled into canyon walls, excavated inspection routes, installed monitoring equipment, and created access passages that would allow future engineers to evaluate geological conditions surrounding the dam. Many of those systems were temporary. Others became permanent parts of the dam's operational network. Some remained accessible after the reservoir filled. preparing for the arrival of the reservoir. The hatch was not designed to intrigue future generations. It was designed to do a job. Yet history transformed it into something entirely different. A forgotten doorway, a surviving piece of a vanished construction landscape, a relic hidden beneath one of America's most important reservoirs. Of course, this raises the question everyone wants answered. What lies behind it? The truth is that nobody publicly knows. Theories range from the mundane to the extraordinary. The simplest explanation is also the most likely. The hatch may lead to a small inspection chamber, drainage passage, or geological monitoring route abandoned after construction ended. Such infrastructure would have been common during a project as large and complex as Hoover Dam. Another possibility is that the entrance connects to a larger network of tunnels extending through sections of the surrounding canyon. Hoover Dam itself contains an extensive system of internal galleries, inspection corridors, drainage routes, and monitoring passages. Many remain in use today, helping engineers evaluate the health and stability of the structure. Could the hatch connect to part of that network? Perhaps, but without direct investigation, nobody can say with certainty. There is also a broader historical context that makes the discovery significant. Lake Mead is not unique. Throughout the American West, reservoirs were created by flooding vast landscapes. Towns disappeared, roads vanished, construction infrastructure was submerged. Across multiple dam projects, engineers sealed access points, abandoned work areas, and left behind systems that would never again be visible. At least, that was the assumption. The modern drought is changing that. As reservoirs shrank, forgotten pieces of history are returning to view. Lake Powell has revealed long submerged canyon features.
Other reservoirs have exposed bridges, foundations, roads, and industrial structures hidden for generations. In many ways, the American Southwest is experiencing a gradual archaeological event unfolding in real time. The water is retreating, and history is resurfacing. The hatch beneath Lake Mead may be one of the most compelling examples of that phenomenon, not because it contains treasure, not because it proves a conspiracy, and not because it hides some secret government project. Its significance comes from something much more human. It represents a moment frozen in time. Nearly 90 years ago, someone stood in that canyon before the reservoir existed. They completed the task that probably seemed routine. They tightened the final bolts. They recorded the work. Then they walked away, knowing the water was coming. What they left behind was never meant to be seen again. Yet nature had other plans. Decades later, a historic drought lowered the reservoir enough for divers to rediscover evidence of decisions made during the Great Depression. The people responsible are long gone. Most of the original workers have passed into history. The landscape they knew has disappeared beneath billions of gallons of water, but the hatch remains, silent, unopened, still holding against the pressure of time. As far as public records indicate, no official effort has been made to reopen it. No dramatic expedition has descended to unlock its bolts. No cameras have revealed what lies beyond the steel door. For now, the mystery remains intact, and perhaps that is what makes the story so compelling. In an age when satellites map every corner of the planet and information travels instantly around the world, it is easy to assume that every mystery has already been solved. Yet beneath the waters of Lake Mead sits a structure built before World War II, sealed before the reservoir existed, and largely forgotten by history. A simple steel hatch, a hidden doorway, a reminder that even within some of the most studied engineering projects in America, unanswered questions still exist. Somewhere beneath the surface, deep below the desert sun,
Those bolts continue to hold exactly as their builders intended nearly a century ago. The hatch is still waiting, and until someone finally opens it, the story remains unfinished.